the roundtable. The roundtable will be chaired by Dr. Angela Viora, as I said before the break, and the roundtable will concern the Australian perspectives on transmigration, space, and time. So, Angela, if you are ready, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Tomasz, and again, hello, everybody. Yeah, this is around the table that wants to be more a dialogue between myself and three guests that I invited tonight, Dr. Vivian Gerin, Dr. Francesco Ricatti, Dr. Chris Wen, and Dr. Jaime Derna. These are scholars and practitioners from different fields, and they also happen to be dear colleagues and friends of mine, because I'm very lucky. And I invited them to hear what they have to say about transmigration, space, and time from their own different fields, because their work all deal with these questions. So I'm going to introduce them, and then I'm going to ask them a few questions, but I really wish to speak as less as possible, so as to give them time and space to explain their own work in terms of transmigration. So the first guest, and I invite them to turn their cameras on if they want to, would be great. And the first one is Dr. Vivian Gerin, who is a postdoctoral research fellow at Deakin University, where she's one of the coordinators at the Center for Resilient and Inclusive Societies. Her research interest encompass diasporic minority belonging and citizenship, Italian studies, image-making practices, and the creation, maintenance, and negotiation of complex cultural identity, network sociability in the digital world, mobility and displacement, and resilience to violent extremism. The second guest that I'm very happy to have here tonight, tonight for us, it's still day for you guys, is Dr. Jaime Derna from Chile. And Jaime is a professional actor, director, and theater researcher. He completed a master's degree in theater arts directing in Wellington, New Zealand, and the PhD in theater and performance at Monash University in Australia. His theater work possesses a strong physical component, and Jaime believes theater to be a trigger and the provocateur of emotional and intellectual processes. His research interest is in art-based methodologies, also ethnography and gender studies. Then I do welcome Dr. Francesco Ricatti, I have the honor to work at Monash University. He's a Casamarca Senior Lecturer and Coordinator of European Languages at Monash University and Coordinator of Italian Studies, and the Deputy Director of the Monash Migration and Inclusion Centre. He's one of the key scholars in Australia about Italian migrations, and his most recent academic work focuses on participatory digital and creative practices that can facilitate the social inclusion of migrants within cultural cities and the development of transcultural leadership for social change. And then last but not least, we have Dr. Chris Wen, who is a sound designer for theater and contemporary performance. His current research trajectory focuses on phenomenology of sound technology in performance and dramaturgy, and the intersection of technical theater, and practice research. His sound design and composition have featured in production in Australia, in Europe, and in Singapore, where also he received awards and prizes for his work on sound design. And he's co-chair of the Green Room Awards Association Independent Theatre Panel and performs with foundational post-punk noise band Primitive Calculators. So start. Are all my guests here? I cannot see them. Yes. Can you all still hear me? Please feel free, Carlos or Tomasz, to interrupt me at any time if there is anything unclear, if the audio goes out, feel free to interrupt me.
Everything is all right as for now.
Okay, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm still familiarizing with the Meet platform, so apologies if I look a bit uncertain at the time. Okay, I'd like to start with Jaime. And I know that I was talking to him about this conference, and I'm quoting him, and he told me that he started from the first definition that a dictionary gives of transmigrate, which means to pass into, to become, incarnate in a different body, to migrate. So this term, transmigration, entails a transformation and a movement, and it is a liminal experience. So Jaime told me that as an artist and an immigrant, he's interested in how memories transmigrate and how transmigration in time and space is transformative, but is also a creative process. He's also going to talk to us about his Project Exiles. And then everyone is welcome to ask him questions about his work on transmigration, liminality, memories in relation to time and space. So Jaime, if you want to talk, please do so.
So Angela, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi. Does anyone need to export my PowerPoint?
I can hear you a bit like far away.
Is there any way in which I can show my PowerPoint?
Sure. Let's see here. Okay. All right. I'm sharing. Okay. Is it visible?
Yes.
All right.
So you will have to be, if you don't mind, you will have to be my secretary. You have to start with the first one. Not the other one.
Sorry, I cannot hear you clearly, Jaime.
Just put the first one. That's the second one. And just make it full in the
Yes. You guide me through?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. In the computer. So, okay, guys. So, I just want to say hello and I want to thank you, everybody, for being here, for inviting me to be part of this conference. First of all, I will apologize myself for not showing myself in the camera, but a couple of weeks ago, I had a major seizure with my brain, which has half my face paralyzed. And that's the reason why I must come and get funny, half my face is paralyzed, fighting with my lips too. Okay? So today I want to speak to you guys about the transformative act of remembering and creating memory. My name is Jaime Donner. I'm a musician to the performance, and as Angela said, I'm a theater assistant and researcher and editor. Although I am Syrian, most of my work has been done between Australia and Greece. You can go to the second slide.
I can no longer hear you.
Can you go to the second slide, Angela? Can you hear me or not, Angela?
I cannot hear you. When I hear you,
So
it's very further away.
oh my God, you cannot hear me at all.
Now, yes.
Can you go to the
Let me
second
just get
slide?
to the presentation and I will move the slides around.
Yes. Go to the second slide.
Yes.
So you cannot hear me properly then. Is that what you're saying?
No, you can just start speaking and I will run the slides.
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. Go to the second slide.
This is the second slide that I got.
I'm seeing the first slide, but anyway.
This is the second one.
So if you don't hear me, just let me know, Angela. I'm having technical issues here. So that second slide starts with a quote from Louis Bourgeois, which has haunted all my life, which is, "I need my memories. They are my documents." And as such, this artist, Louis Bourgeois, works, he says that metaphorically, she opens the cabinet of her memories and places in the table and works and do her sculpture and her work based on her memories. In the same way, maybe 7 years ago at the beginning of my PhD, I wrote in one of my workbooks the following: "I am attracted to the danger of the ambiguous place in which the boundary between the public and the private is blurred, the danger of placing truth in between the other, the spectator, and me, the truth of my own self, of my own biography, that space in which pieces of myself get offered and burned for the right of the performer, looking always for a transformation. I am particularly interested on autobiographical performance because they are a lofty of knowledge and that by stating a personal conflict, they describe and expose a general human conflict. In my particular work, issues related to migration, belonging, and gender. As you can see, the two photos up there are about the project Exile, the return of a man called Ulysses. Project Exile explores Ulysses' journey back home from after the Trojan War in Italy as a metaphor of the necessity of belonging on the perennial search for the inner self. In Project Exile, the Odyssey is a pretext situating the narrative in a contemporary life of the dysfunctional family. The rite of passage and the urge to identify a place at home become the essential triggers of the plot. The conflict is contained in Ulysses' assertion: people are not a frozen scene in a photograph that you left behind. Time doesn't stop. Time doesn't forget. In that respect, as an immigrant, I've always felt like Ulysses in his way back from war to Italy, always in this land of London. You can go to the slide 3, Angela. So now, to keep going a little bit and to try to explain you how things go, I will go through a couple of concepts that might need to have. I know that most of you are clear with this concept, but I will go just as a way of contextualizing my talk. Um, Liminality for me is a transformative, this slide, I will speak about the liminality and its transformative power in theater and performance. Bankenet's analysis of the traditional rituals and specific traditional rituals identifies three parts on right: the separation of the liminal, and the aggregation of liminal. In the transition or liminal phase, the individual for Bankenet is in transit from one former physical, sociopolitical, religious state to the next. So him, the liminal is always at transitional state. Then Victor Turner takes this work and applies it to write a passage. What interests him is the creative possibility that the living face the force of liminality as a breakthrough of chaos into cosmos. For Turner, the liminal phase is not only a breaking point, a destruction of an structure, but also a point that leads to something new. It breaks to reveal, it destroys to create, opening the possibility for a sociocultural transition and change. I'm not going to go into details into Turner as he does apply this concept of specificity here. We're not there yet, Angela. Go back. Because in theater he speaks about liminality as liminal, because he says that liminality of transformation in theater is transitorial and not permanent and entirely passive. But I'm not going to go into that discussion. What is important for me now in liminality is application of liminality to theater performance and power of transformation. And this transformation occurs normally in relation to space, time, performance, and audience. All these things get transformed in one way or another in a theater performance. Now, theater performance is a limited place because at its core, binary called speech and simultaneity collapse. So we have the reality fantasy, character, actor, audience, exhibitionist, voyeur, inside, outside, all these binaries collapse. Now, again, for a concept of liminality, liminality sits within a binary. In the case of writer faculty, between the boy and the adult, is the liminal instead of the boy and the adult. Okay? So,
Jaime, maybe we can stop here just for a little moment. So I will also give room to the other speakers to talk about liminality and transformation, and we can really intersect their work with yours, and then we'll come back to you. So that will be more like a dialogue. Are you happy for me to do so? All right. Okay. Thank you, Jaime. It was very enlightening. And Jaime talks a lot about, has talked to us about migration and being a migrant. I know, looking at the work of Francesco, that representations and self-representation of migrants often exist within a normative dichotomy between assimilation, integration on one hand, and the performance of ethnicity, of difference and multiculturalism on the other. So why this dichotomy, between fitting in a culture, a new place, but also performing one's own ethnicity and difference? Why is dichotomy is problematic and how we can challenge it? I'm asking.
Thank you, Angela. Can you confirm that you can hear me? Yeah.
Yes, very clear.
The camera is on, but I don't know if you can see me or not. But
I cannot
anyway.
see you, but hopefully the others can.
No, it's yeah, I'm not sure why is that,
just
but
keep
doesn't
it on.
matter. I will just talk. I'll try to share a page if I can. Let me just try 1 second. Can you confirm that you can see? This is
yes, la nostra Prato. Yes, we can see.
So this is a project that I have completed with the support of National Geographic, and it's a project about young migrants and children of migrants in Prato. And I just wanted to show a little bit of it to explain and illustrate my point, which is that very often when we want to hear about migrants, or even when we want to hear from migrants, we tend to focus, first of all, on migration itself, and then we tend to focus on difference. Um, in actual fact, when you work and develop participatory work with young migrants and children of migrants, often you discover that, of course, they are interested in many other aspects of their lives, not just migration. And also often they resist this attempt to focus on their difference and focus on their ethnicity. On the other hand, we also have the risk that, you know, assimilationist ideologies want to completely eliminate these differences. So for me, the question is, how do we develop a system that allow these migrants and children of migrants to just be themselves and tell the stories that they care about? Um, so we asked them to take a number of photographs that express their relationship with the city. And here you can see some. For example, this one, siamo tutti migranti, we are all migrants. This one called The Veil, um, it's a sort of a stereotypical photo that you would imagine about migrants, but actually is precisely challenging that stereotype in the sense that only one of these women is in fact Muslim, and none of them wear the veil normally, but one of them knows how to wear the veil and taught the others how to do it as an interesting cultural practice. Now, if I go to this other photo made by other young migrant women, you can see that here they are trying to represent the sexist gaze that often is a problem for them when they live in the city, and they wanted to show that the strength of women removes fear. So by taking this photo with their back and suggesting that the strength, the fact that they are together removes fear, they are resisting precisely that often sexualized gaze that characterize them as migrants. So these are just examples, but I wanted to show it to you to argue that we need to find new ways of talking about migrants, but especially about talking with migrants that really challenge those typical representation of migration and difference, and really engage with what matters to migrants and to their children. And this is why I think we need to look at other theoretical frameworks, such as transculturation, the idea that there is always reciprocal influence between migrant groups and other groups in the city, and that they influence each other and they change the city in the process. And so what is interesting for me is to reflect about processes and representations and narratives that can really do that. And I think it's interesting that the National Geographic actually wasn't very keen to share this material. In a sense, it's material that challenge some of their typical work about migration, and perhaps they couldn't make sense of it, which is interesting in itself, because the question is not only how we collect these different forms of representation, but also how do we make them more visible when the dominant media would rather continue to portray difference and ethnicity as the only thing that matters when we talk about migrants.
Wow. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Francesco, for showing us your work in Prato with Monash University and National Geographic. And I would like now to make the link to Vivian's work, because drawing upon what Francesco has just said, Vivian, your work understands transmigration as consisting of the interplay between uprooting and regrounding processes. Could you please tell us more on this? And I know your work in particular about Somali communities, both in Italy and in Australia.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's a real honour to be here, to be speaking tonight in with such an illustrious panel of people, and really wonderful discussion so far that does relate very strongly to the work that I've done, also looking at representations of belonging and thinking about the ways in which migrants represent themselves and the ways in which that contrasts, as Francesco was saying, with some dominant media framings. And one of the things that's really interesting, I'm going to pick up on 2 points that were made in both Jaime and Francesco's presentations. This idea that Jaime mentioned, the idea of people not being a frozen image. And I think that one of the things that we often see when migrants are represented is a very static, reductionist view that tends to want to categorize and put people in their place, to know them without actually knowing anything about them. And we can see the way that that operates within a hierarchy of multiculturalism in Australia, which tends to assign people particular communities, not realizing that within those communities there are all kinds of differences and every single experience is unique. And so one of the things that was really interesting in the study that I did was this thinking about this experience of migration as uprooting, and then the experience of regrounding or making a home as being actually quite intertwined and not so separate as we might think. Migration is not something that happens once in the way that it might have done more traditionally. It tends to be a movement back and forth, especially now with the technologies that we all use. So even though someone may not be physically moving, their actual presence in space is altered by the ways in which they use certain kinds of technologies, as we know. And that's even more pronounced, I suppose, in the situation of the pandemic, where people that may have been more accustomed to moving to see family members around the world, particularly in the diaspora, for example, we're no longer able to do that. And so these ways of connecting and ways of moving across space and time without actually physically moving were even more important. I wanted to share a couple of slides, but I'm not sure if that's going to be possible. Is that something I can do, or?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Or if you want to wait for like a second time, maybe I can just give some time to Chris, and then we can.
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. Happy to do that.
Move, keep moving, and keep.
There was just one slide in particular that wanted to focus on the work of a Melbourne-based artist called Nadia Faragab, who actually really embodies that idea of recovering the liminal space and the non-fixity, and the ways in which the lived experience of having a migrant background or being a migrant is actually very much intertwined with the everyday experiences of everybody else in the society. And it's a really beautiful representation that I wanted to show on a slide, because it really speaks to what we've just been talking about, in a beautiful way. We can do that at the end.
Show us that slide if
I can find it. If I can't seem to, I'm not familiar with.
I can give you time, because I'm just mindful of time, so I want to give everybody's room. But please search that slide, and for sure I'm going to come back to you. Because you just said something very important linking to Francesco or here. Okay, so these are all, please Vivian, you talk.
Yeah, so this was part of an exhibition. Sorry, I meant to go back. This is part of an exhibition that was held in 2011 called Chronologies. So thinking about different understandings of time that occur often in the diaspora and with migration, and that the clothing worn in this image by the woman depicted is actually made up of a Google image search of the term Somalia. So the kinds of images that we tend to associate with Somalia were ones that she mobilized to make this work. And then in contrast, she's presenting her identity and its complexity, drawing on historical artifacts and having made pieces of furniture out of Alindi fabrics from Somalia, but importantly, in identifying as being many different things simultaneously and performing those different kinds of actions. So they're all continuing actions that lead into each other and are not in any way in conflict. They're actually working in a dynamic way, and they're not ending either. So it really, I like it because it's giving us a very strong sense of the way that identity is a process, and the way that migration and belonging and home are not separate, but they're actually processes in which, whether we're aware of it or not, even if we haven't had the experience of migration, we are all involved in those processes throughout life. And I think the experience of migration highlights them. And by engaging in this way with this kind of representation, we have access to the dynamism of identity, and it's a real gift and richness, rather than something that should be shut down, as too often happens in dominant media. So I'll stop there, but thank you for letting me share the slide.
No, thank you. And that actually gave us a real, an image of a visualization of what you were saying before. And from Jaime speaking about freezing in time and space, and Francesco about challenging the idea that we have of migration, and also now with this work that Vivian showed us, and we really saw about, made me think of how migration is by definition a moving, dynamic thing, but the ideas we might have on migration are actually kind of locked in space and time. And this is the challenge. And this is why I'd like here now to call on stage, on virtual stage, Chris, that is a sound designer, as I said, and he made in his work, he's researching on a very interesting connection about between the journey of sound and the journey of migrants. So I'd like, please, Chris, to let us know more about this.
Sure. Pardon me. Just checking that you can hear me nice and clearly.
Yes, we can hear you,
great.
And we can see you. Welcome.
Excellent. I'm doing well. So
well, with that microphone, for sure you are. You really are in sound and tech.
Yeah,
I'm jealous.
the sound nerd definitely displays himself here. Thanks to everyone who's already spoken. It's such an interesting panel to be on. These ideas of time and movement, I think, are really relevant to sound. As a sound designer, I'm coming from a different kind of technological perspective to performance and to our discussions of how we inhabit worlds. And for me, sound it's a function of space and time. Right, it's shaped by energy, motion, and location. So if I ask you now to join me in a little kind of hypothetical thought experiment, if you consider a ringing gong, or a church bell, or a friend shouting from down the street, these are all familiar sounds, I hope. Just think for a moment about where you're placed when you hear those sounds. What are your surroundings? Is the sound that you hear the sounding of that sound, or it's resound? And that journey is invisible and it's detectable. So when the bell rings or your friend shouts hello from down the street, we know what the impulse of the sound is. Right? We know where it's originating from. But that journey to our ear is fundamental to the tone, to the timbre, the vibration of that sound. So you don't hear a church bell, for example, as the sound of the bell itself ringing. If you were right beside the bell, you would be deafened by it. It's incredibly loud. So you're hearing it, it's in Melbourne here, from St Paul's Cathedral. You're hearing the resonance from the nearby buildings, the Flinders Street station that's across the road. You're hearing the sound as it's shaped by the journey and the world around it. And the provocation I want to throw out there is, can we perhaps see the migrant experience as one that is shaped by its journey as well. We see the migrant, this human being who has transcended borders and been reflected by changes in state, you know, from time, distance, energy. They are that the migrant is not the impulse to leave. They're not the person that left. They're the person that's arrived. Which for me raises some interesting thoughts about that liminality of borders and the shifts that we cross thresholds. And I'll sort of pass it on to the word now. I want to think through journeys, perhaps.
Thank you, Chris, for this very new and interesting perspective on liminality and borders and time, which is something that the other guests have touched on tonight. And I'm mindful of the time. We have kind of 10 minutes. I still want to leave 5 minutes at the end for questions and answers for our audience, think about your work, and I'm sharing again Jaime's slides. Just bear with me. Okay, can you all see the slides? Yeah, all right. Jaime, any final question on this transmigration space and time, also on the basis of what the other speaker said?
I just wanna say two small things. Like, one thing that I got very interested is when we were talking about the forms of representation, how do we represent the immigrant? I am an immigrant. I have been an immigrant in 38 countries, and I'm not. I think one of the problems is how is the representation of the immigrant, but also is how do I, as an immigrant, represent myself? Because I'm not really the citizen that I was. You know, like in this transmigration from time and space, from one country to another, I have changed. And my perception of what it is to be citizen, my perception of what it is to change, and it also changed. You know, uh, can you see me properly, guys? I see you all suffering while I speak. Can you see me properly?
I can hear you breaking up.
So you cannot see me properly.
I cannot hear you anymore.
Because I asked you, so you understood what I said.
Yes, but yeah,
I
not
guess
super clearly, unfortunately.
Angela, just to finish, I want you to put the fifth slide, the number 5.
Sorry, I cannot understand. I'm not sure if it's only me who cannot hear you clearly, or
Can you put the slide number 5? And I will
very quickly, Jaime. Yes, very quickly, because
yes, very quickly. I will just gonna leave you with the last paragraph of that script, that's from the script, in which it says, in which Lee says he's trying to leave because he wanna go to Patria. And Khalil so confronts him, telling him that Patria no longer exists. It's nothing more than an unclear image in your head. So by saying that, what I'm saying is, when we travel, when we migrate, our representation is very conflicted because we have a poetical image of what was on.
Okay. Yes, that I could hear more clearly. Thank you. And I'm just finishing off with a question that was for Francesco, but I think that can interest also Vivian and Chris about time, because Francesco also was talking with him, and we always think about migration and transmigration, and we think about space, crossing space, crossing geographical places. But how about time? How time is involved in migration, and why matters, of time as important as spatial and geographical concerns when we study migration. So we talk a lot now about space, but how about time? And actually, Jaime already touched on that in terms of memories.
And I think it also connects to what Chris was saying before, because obviously the traveling of sound or the traveling of people is in space, but it's also through time. I think this is something very important that is emerging more and more in contemporary sociological and cultural literature about migration, is precisely this need to refocus much more on the importance of time in the process and experience of migration. For example, the way the border violence work, the attempt to stop refugees who are seeking safety, we usually think about that there's a violence in place, a border to stop the migrants. But it's also very important to consider how long it takes to cross the border. We are seeing it now, of course, with the tragedy of Ukraine and how many people are coming as refugees to Poland and how quickly that is, and compare that to, for instance, refugees who have been stuck in Australia for over 9 years now, just because they were seeking safety. So that the dimension of time very often in the experience of migrants is actually even more important than the moving from one place to another. And there are many different ways you can think about temporary visa. You can think about how long migrants are in one place. There are many aspects of temporality that are essential to the experience of migrants. But very briefly, the other point I would like to make is also that in remembering and performing and telling stories about migration, again, the temporality is very important because certain events in time expand. So for instance, someone might talk for an hour about the moment he said goodbye, and then talk for an hour about the following 30 years of his life as a migrant, because that precise moment in time matters so much more that it expands in terms of history and narrative. And so in that sense, time is also important, not just in the moment in which migration is experienced, but also in remembering migration, we assign very different temporalities to different experience as migrants.
Yeah, thank you very much, Francesco. Very poignant points. And as a migrant myself, I can certainly relate to, temporality, temporary visas, the time of, waiting time for processes, bureaucracies, and so on. Any final words on these or something related to these from Vivian or Chris? We wanted to talk about a lot more and 1 hour is very little. Vivian or Chris, please.
Just on that temporality, I've been watching in this conversation how time is flexing and stretching just in what we're doing in the speech that we have now, and there is, returning to sort of the point Vivian was making about migration being, you know, multi-directional and a back and forth movement. There is this, we're conveying ideas between Poland and Australia and all of the other participating countries that the conference attendees are from. And there is kind of this digital migration of ideas happening, which from my kind of sonic perspective, the glitching of Jaime's audio, the far more clear audio that Vivian has had, for example, whatever you can hear of mine. I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but there's something in that. There's something in the way this sound is traveling over the internet via many different routes and destinations. That the great comment Vivian made in the chat about roots and roots is kind of valid here, and I'll pass the baton, I suppose, to Vivian for any further thoughts that they might have.
Thank you, Chris. Vivian, we really have like 1 minute left or so, and then the audience will have questions. Yes.
Thinking in terms of waiting and time, my mind turns obviously to the experience of long lockdowns that many of us in the world have endured as a way of managing the pandemic. And I feel like that long lockdown experience in some ways did, in reality, create new distances between people that were not there before in a way that might parallel certain kinds of migration. And so thinking about, and then, you know, parallels have been drawn as well, people complaining about long lockdowns, complaining of feeling imprisoned, and then the really bizarre reality of people who have, and really the human rights abuse that's been inflicted on people who have been in jail for more than 9 years, as Francesco mentioned earlier, while those in long lockdown are complaining of feeling like they're in jail and wanting to kill politicians and things like that. So I think, yeah, it's really interesting to think about who has to wait and who's accustomed to waiting, who's prepared to wait patiently and who isn't, and how that reflects also the privilege of different experiences of migration or not migration.
Well, that was a very great ending, in the sense, you know, finishing off with reflecting on the COVID pandemic that we have all been through differently in different parts of the world, but still with something common to us. And as Excellence Ana Maria Ramirez said today in the opening, you know, in these we are in this world now with challenges, and they say we are in a fractured world, and this conference, like, you know, uniting languages, perspectives and countries is really important, reflecting from different perspectives on common matters. So while apologizing to Tomasz and Carlos because I'm running a bit late, I'd like to know if, please, there is any questions from the audience for our speakers. And I know we have some guests from Italy in the audience, so if you want to ask questions in Italian, I'm happy to translate. Francesco can understand Italian, and Vivian as well too. Spanish as well for Jaime, and Polish, and Tomasz will translate. Please.
Okay, I have a question. I'm sorry, but Angela, now for my English is no good. I say it's very good conference for you. And probably I have a question for Vivian and Francesco, no? Because I think about the force of representation of migration and the staging that sometimes occurs of these images, if time and space should be covered as a real or fictitious object, in this sense. It is about the clear treatment of the images in space, a migrant living in a neutral space. Can I see the images, for example, in National Geographic magazine? The images are very beautiful, but the real probably is different. No. A migrant living in a neutral space, in quotes, that mise en scène that does not provoke drama because it is too aesthetically worked or museography work representation. I'm not sure if clear my question.
Francesco, Vivian?
Well, I mean, that is very important, but I think what we need to consider is that reality and representation and performance are all operating together at the same time. So, I mean, the representation in the photos that I've shown, they have become a website, which is a reality in itself. It's something that people see. And migrants are representing their realities, of course, through photographs. So it's a representation, but it links back to their own reality. And what they are trying to do there is to change their own reality, to change how the city perceive them and how they perceive the city, and develop different kind of dialogues that in turns can awfully influence reality. So it's very hard to distinguish clearly between what is performance and what is representation and what is reality, because the performance itself is always a reality, of course, but also the performance is always an attempt not just to represent reality, but also to change it. And so these are always together for me. It's important to keep them together somehow, to remember that this, even what the National Geographic does with that very kind of ethnicized, stereotypical representation of migration becomes a reality in itself. It's never just neutral representation. It has an impact in the way we understand migrants and migration and society. And of course, you can have the magazine in your hand, which is another, objective reality.
Vivian,
yeah, the term reification is coming to mind. So the ways in which certain representations are made is never devoid of power and politics. And so certain kinds of representations serve a political purpose. If you reify migrants, whether it's through an exoticization of like a National Geographic cover, and you're making them into an exotic object, that's one kind of reification. That's also, in a way, putting a migrant on a pedestal, but actually also not allowing them to speak on their own terms. And on the other hand, there's the media kind of reification, the discourse around migration we often see, where migrants are positioned as being a threat, depending on where they're coming from in the world, because we've seen different discourses around a more recent migration from Ukraine, for example. But I think it's really important to think about the way that, as Francesco was saying, they function and they're in relation to one another, and they're also in a political dynamic that is either challenging the dominant hegemony or is reinforcing it. And so the kinds of images that Francesco was presenting are really questioning that dominant hegemony and allocation of the migrant in society, and instead perhaps attempting to have a dialogue with it, but also even disrupting it. So rearranging that configuration in a way that may threaten the dominant order, but not in a way that is actually threatening, as a media account might present it, more just a destabilizing creative influence of innovation, but one that perhaps the powers of be are afraid of because they don't want to lose their positions of power.
Thank you, Francesco and Vivian. Any other question or anything from Chris on this about the intersection between performance and representation and reality?
If I want to,
Carlos, yeah.
if I can Another question, because I forget also ask what is the what the perspective for Christopher in this case, because now I think about the sounds. What is the role the sounds in this case? We speak about the images and representation, but the sounds are sometimes also have representation in the space and the time, and we can the sounds can transform the space, the times. What is the role with the sounds and the music, or in the same question? What is the role?
I think certainly on a kind of cultural production kind of track, migrant communities were, they bring what we kind of call diasporic sounds. They create kind of urban music cultures based on where they've come from and where they've been to, and the other contexts they have, the kind of the underground dance scene in Portugal or UK bass, or they're drawing on many different cultural influences. So these become a representation of journeys as well, journeys and contacts and ways of performing self, ways of kind of claiming space in new places. So it was interesting in the slide that Vivian showed, and all of the ways that artist described herself. Many of those were sound words, or engaging with sound. A DJ and a speaker. So I think sound does become part of a quite unique kind of my identity of migration, not necessarily of the migrant themselves as a person, but as a group that is as fluid and hard to pin down as migrants themselves in any place.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you very much for your questions, for asking.
Any other question? Any other questions from the audience? It's so fascinating because we actually, we set up this dialogue, but we didn't prepare, we didn't rehearse. So everything that is happening is really a performance, like an improv. And I'm so happy that, we are just flowing with the process, and these different works are really communicating to each other, from the perspective of representation and the diaspora, even to sound. So a lot to reflect on. Please, if there is any other questions for our speakers, don't be shy. Or any other, I think we're actually on time. I thought we were running late, Carlos, but I think we're actually on time. If there is no other questions, I don't want to jeopardize the whole schedule and make everybody run late in the conference. So unless there is another thing that our speakers may want to say, or any final questions, all I can say is that I did enjoy all these. I was just throwing the ball and you guys did all the rest beautifully. I thank you for coming, Chris, Vivian, Jaime, and Francesco, with your expertise. And thank you, Carlos, for having us, for hosting us. And thank you to all the members of the audience who listened to us, and I hope you all had fun, because I really did enjoy this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I want to say I would like to thank for your participation, Christopher, Vivian, Jaime, and you, Angela, because we work very good. I also say I sorry my English because I don't speak English, but I try to communicate with us now. I appreciate a lot for your participation in this conference. Thank you very much.
Your English is great, and thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you, Francesco, as well, and thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and I just wanted to add at the very end that we have a short break now, and after the break there will be another session, the one that will be conducted in Polish. The session will start at noon in the Central European time zone, so see you soon.